It is No Pucks Given, the Pittsburgh Hockey Now podcast. I am Dan Kingerski. Tuesday, November 12th. We are just hours from the Pittsburgh Penguins losing to the Dallas Stars 7-1 at PPG Paints Arena. So there are a couple things that we need to really unpack from this absolute beatdown delivered by Dallas. First, we're the goaltending situation. That's the micro. That's the here and now. I don't think it has bigger implications beyond just those three players and the future of the position. It's not greatly changing the team or the organization. So, but we'll get into the goaltending as Yoel Blomqvist. He had one of those nights. And one of those days at the office allows a couple of soft goals in the first, 7 minutes or so. And the bigger issue is the Penguins game. And this podcast and this, what I wrote post-game, really is part 2 of the column that I wrote back on December 16th, 2023, when I wrote very sternly in the headline, something is horribly wrong with the Penguins. It was obvious back then. That was the night that the Toronto Maple Leafs on Hockey Night in Canada thoroughly embarrassed the Penguins 7-0. And it was a shellacking. It was a drubbing. Oddly enough, the Penguins had some scoring chances in the first period that night. They clearly had none on Monday against Dallas. That was another no-show loss, just like they've done to Carolina twice this season, home and away. They've just been swallowed up and not had any pushback, any fight in them. Going back, in fact, this problem, and it is the Penguins' biggest problem. Use the word you like. It's really, I think, a matter of semantics. Motivation, intensity, heart. The Penguins lack it. Not just going back to last season, but going back to the end of 22-23, when they had a 95% chance to make the playoffs. And they absolutely mailed in the last 2 or 3 weeks of that season. They absolutely just couldn't fire the motor. That was, again, very evident last season. From the very beginning. That this team, it might have a big engine, but there's no fuel in it. It just doesn't start all the time. They can get up for a third period against Washington, their arch rival, and they can throw everything into it and they can win that game. And then the very next game have absolutely nothing. I don't think any other team in the NHL has as many no-show losses. No team has more absolutely disappointing, lethargic, lifeless, listless, heartless performances, as do the Penguins. And unpacking that is going to be we're going to have to, start slashing at some sacred cows here. What has happened is the Penguins are still relying on Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin to be their best players. That's fine. Those are still 2 very good players. Going beyond that, the team is also relying on Crosby and Malkin, maybe Letang or, Carlson and these other players to be their heartbeat as well. You're relying on a 37 and a 38-year-old player to be your heart and soul. That's not how it's supposed to work. As the Penguins were just in the midst of being embarrassed by Dallas on Monday night, there was one player who finally threw some gloves, finally roughed up somebody else, and it was 5-0 by that point when Sidney Crosby roughed up Sam Steele? Why didn't anybody else do that and do that earlier? We've seen 4 other teams come back on the Penguins when the Penguins lead 2-0. So when Joel Blomqvist gives up a pair of soft goals in 7 minutes, even when he gives up the third goal, and that was, that awful goal to Mason Marchment, in which Chris Letang and Matt Grzelcyk were beaten back on a puck. Both of them were beaten back on a dump-in attempt. Can you imagine that? Both defensemen getting beat on a dump-in. And Marchment gets the puck right in the slot and just snaps it past Blomqvist. That was certainly not the goalie's fault. That was the defenseman's fault. Where was the pushback? Where was the anger? Where was the emotion? And the reality is, you're asking older players who don't have the same emotional tank to provide it for the entire team. This problem should have been obvious a year ago, a year and a half ago, but for some reason it seems to have eluded decision makers. And make no mistake, Kyle Dubas makes plenty of money to figure all of this stuff out. However, the Penguins really haven't added enough talent around Crosby and Malkin. I mean, just think about when Brian Rust was out and Sullivan had to put Malkin and Crosby together. The bottom 9 couldn't have hit water if they fell out of a boat. And that's not a knock on any of those players. I mean, you're asking Drew O'Connor now to be a top-line winger, and nobody has praised O'Connor more than I have. But asking him to be a top-line guy consistently is probably out-kicking his coverage. He brings a lot to an NHL roster, but you're asking him to be a 25-goal scorer. And we all kind of wondered, maybe we thought he had it. He probably doesn't. He's probably a good third-line guy, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. But you're asking him to be a top-line winger. And the same with Lars Eller, who had to play second-line center in the absence of Evgeny Malkin playing on the top line there. Eller is, again, a rock-ribbed center that a whole lot of teams chasing a Stanley Cup will be asking for very soon. But you're asking him to be a second-line center. That's at least one step above his pay grade, if not 2 steps above his pay grade. And it's almost comic relief at some points to see how much is placed upon Crosby's shoulders. I mean, the guy's not Superman. The fact that he has been at points in his career certainly has, but there's not that emotional fire and spark around them. There's not enough talent around them. When you look at Dubas's acquisitions over the summer, we're looking at Anthony Beauvillier, Kevin Hayes, Cody Glass. I like Blake Lizotte a great deal. He's a fourth-line center who brings a little jam to his game. That would have been a player you ask to do something when it's 2 or 3-0. But that's not his game. I mean, his game is gritty, but it's not spark plug kind of a game. And the Penguins have no spark plugs. And so their problem remains that if Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin don't provide the offense and emotional engagement in the absolute beginning, nobody else does. That's a huge problem. That means this team, and I can't say they're heartless, because that would be a huge insult to several of the players. I mean, Crosby brings it every night, but as a collective, they don't necessarily have a collective heart. They have, the older guys can bring it for that period and be dominant. But when they, the next game, they're a little bit tapped out. Who else is going to do it? And nobody else seems to be there. And so I look at Kyle Dubas's comments multiple times, end of last season, at the draft this season, and I think he said it one more time as well, when he said there's too much respect for the locker room not to be competitive. Well, they've got 6 wins in 17 games. Is that competitive? So what are they going to do about the mixture? Is Dubas going to kind of sit on his hands as he did last year and just let it play out? If that's the case, if the Penguins get 6 wins, you're going to be shocked when I run these numbers here. Think about this. 6 wins and 2 overtime or shootout losses, 2 loser points, shall we say, in the first 20% of the season. So just times that by 4. At this point, we're talking 24 wins and 8 loser points. That's 56 points the Penguins are on pace for. That's terrible. That's no part of that should be acceptable. Now, I'm going to dive into this Mike Sullivan things. I know so many of your reactions are like, you know what, Dan, to hell with it. Sullivan has to go. The players, burn it down. It's time to rebuild. National colleagues were saying that tonight. There were even a couple of guys in the Pittsburgh press box saying, I don't know how Sullivan survives this. Here's the thing about that. There are financial and contractual obligations and considerations here that really prevent that sort of cathartic tear it down. You can't bring the wrecking ball if the building hasn't been condemned. Mike Sullivan's got a few more years on his contract. And so here's what's going to happen. FSG, they're not cheap, and I don't mean to imply that, but they are, they look at their money very closely. And they're going to say, can any coach come in and improve this? If we fire Mike Sullivan, is the coach who comes in going to improve attendance, getting more wins, and get playoff revenue? Are they going to see a return on the investment if they swallow, let's use a round number, and I'm guessing a little bit here, or a lot. If they swallow Mike Sullivan's $15 million, will they get a return on the investment of firing him? And the answer is no. Scotty Bowman, and they could bring Herb Brooks down from the great rink in the sky, and they're not going to make much change because of all the things, all of the bricks that I put in the wall earlier. Of all of those things that I laid out, what's a coach going to do? A coach can only oversee the sinking ship until they figure out the emotional entanglement of the team. Until they solve that, until there is the proper mixture of players in the room and maybe a few less mistake-prone players. Again, you run into the same exact problems with the roster. Contractual and financial obligations really prevent the tear it down. And anyone can say, just fire the coach. Trade all the players. It ain't that easy. If it were, it would have been done. I mean, you think that some of the Penguins players have trade value? No, they absolutely don't. So, you can clear all the salary cap space you want. There's no more free agency to go sign players, and you can't go trade for the players you want. So what are you going to do? I I get a little apoplectic when my timeline is just filled with fire Sullivan, fire Sullivan, fire Sullivan. I get it, and I understand the exasperation of it because 31 other teams would probably fire the coach at this point. But this is an entirely different situation in which Sullivan hasn't lost the room. It's that the room isn't enough. The room is missing very fundamental and key ingredients. There's no yeast in the bread. So I don't know how else to kind of explain that. And this is where I get accused of defending Mike Sullivan. And believe me, I'm not. I'm trying to bring the context to you. Better or worse. I'm kind of telling you how it is. Which a couple days ago we're writing about a great win in Washington, but clearly that emptied their tank. So you're not going to see Sullivan fired without a few more of these. Sullivan doesn't get fired until it's absolutely 100% unavoidable. And even then, I believe he might last the rest of the season. If they get to a point where they realize that the ship has, in fact, sunk, sunk, and at that point, you're just going to ride it out. Why would you make this big change mid-season trying to rescue things? At that point, you take the first overall pick or a good shot at it anyway. But that's kind of why I feel like there's this inconsistency. It's because they're relying on the wrong players for the emotional engagement and the heart. And let's talk about the goaltending situation. In my heart, I really wanted to do a little bit of a podcast on Monday afternoon talking about the goalie situation, the three goalies. But I also knew that Yoel Blomqvist was starting on Monday, and that would have a big effect on where we go from here. And it did. Unfortunately, Yoel gave up just a couple of terrible goals. Each of those should have been stopped. It wasn't like they were borderline goals. Both of them had to be stopped. There is a little bit of an unfortunate pattern emerging with Blomqvist, in which when there's a little extra internal pressure, he's not been good. He's only 22 years old. He's going to have to work on that little aspect of his mental game of compartmentalizing opportunity, which can also be felt as pressure. I'm one of those people. The bigger the opportunity, the more pressure I feel. And I hate that. That's just how I'm wired, however. And it caused me early in my, my broadcasting and, different parts of my career to absolutely gag on a few opportunities. I mean, I get it. Going back to last April, Kyle Dubas had rolled the red carpet for Blomqvist if he performed well in the AHL playoffs to be the NHL goalie with Tristan Jarry this season. Dubas made no qualifications that he needed to make space for Blomqvist, but he wanted to see Blomqvist perform well in the playoffs. That was my question in the press conference. I'm patting myself on the back a little bit. And Blomqvist absolutely choked them away. He was subpar in game one against the Lehigh Valley Phantoms. But in game two, he kind of had a Marc-Andre Fleury 2013 sort of game. Now, in that game, the Wilkes-Barre-Scranton Penguins got absolutely hosed by the referees. A couple of just unbelievably bad calls. I forget who it was. It might have been Jack St. Ivany, who was smart enough to keep his hands down, stick on the ice, just gets punched a couple of times. I think it was him, but it might have been somebody else. And the referees called both players. Instead of the Penguins getting a power play, which could have sealed the game in the third period, they play 4-on-4. In the resulting minutes, Lehigh Valley scores on an obvious high stick. The guy put his stick like above his head to deflect the puck past Blomqvist. Everybody sees it. Everybody stands up and stops, assuming that, both referees saw it. Neither did. They didn't call it. They called it a good goal. Anyway, to the point about Blomqvist's performance, to that point, he was brutal in that game. Rebounds everywhere, soft goals. I mean, the Penguins kept rallying to score, and he kind of kept giving it back. And it was bad enough. And I took some flack for, I took Blomqvist, I took him to the woodshed a little bit for that performance. And people were like, no, it's just one game. But it was also that very important game that Dubas had placed a lot of importance upon. And so what happens? Dubas signs Nedeljkovic. With no pressure in training camp, Blomqvist is again very good. But the couple times that Blomqvist in this season has had the opportunity to seize something, he's been bad. He went down way too early, gave the top half of the net against Edmonton. In fairness, the Penguins stunk in that Edmonton game as well. But he kind of gave up 4 goals all in the same spots. The top half of the net was wide open. Okay, he didn't seize his opportunity then. Alex Nedeljkovic starts, the next, several games or whatever. So that was the first game that Jarry had been sent down to Wilkes-Barre. Blomqvist, with no pressure, plays brilliantly against Washington. Gets the net again. Now there's pressure. Jarry is back. Jarry's basically in the stands watching, and Blomqvist is again terrible in a game that he could have grabbed an NHL role. And he's going to have to work on that a little bit. So going forward, it's a little bit of a predicament for the Penguins. They can't send Blomqvist down on Tuesday. That would be the absolute wrong message to send to the kid. One bad game and you're gone. You almost have to make him the third goalie Wednesday night against the Detroit Red Wings and keep him around a little while longer just to get him some work, to let that game purge itself from his system. And then you can kind of assess the other goaltenders. I think we know pretty much what we've got with Alex Nedeljkovic. He's a 1A guy. He's stolen at least one game this season. So, he's had flashes of being a pretty good 1A, if not, an average sort of starting goaltender. It's not a bad place to be. Certainly no criticism, right? And we get to see exactly where Tristan Jarry is. Health-wise, is he fully healthy? Can he complete the butterfly? Can he do all of these things and move as well? I wonder if there's a little lingering something there. It's just so inexplicable. Is it really the yips, or is there a little something physical? We'll never know. But if Jarry comes back and plays well, and because both Nedeljkovic and Blomqvist got lit up on Monday, Nedeljkovic giving up 4 goals, Blomqvist giving up 3, it's the perfect opportunity for Sullivan to put Jarry back in the net against Detroit. And then it gets really interesting, because now we begin to find out where this goes. Performance matters. That's Sullivan's mantra. So Jarry would figure to get the start on Wednesday, if he's really good. Then things begin to crystallize. Jarry, Nedeljkovic, the 2 NHL contract goalies, stay in the NHL, and Blomqvist goes down to work on a couple of things, because he does have a couple of things to work on. A little bit of the anticipation and burst he could work on. And by burst, I don't mean pipe to pipe. I mean burst from deep in his net to top of his crease. He can get a little saggy and gives too much net. And NHL shooters will find that net if you give it. And I think he needs to be a little bit better with the anticipation, which is going to come with experience. When to jump on top of that crease and when to hold your position deep in the net. The AHL is probably a pretty good place to work on something like that, and maintaining your upright position as much as you can without kind of flopping and paddling around in the crease, exposing the top half of the net, which he's done a few times. Then again, if Jari is bad, Blomqvist stays. Because Blomqvist has also shown the ability to win games. And Jari has to prove he can do that. So right now, it's still in flux. Blomqvist should have reminded you that he is a rookie goalie, though. And to really temper expectations for him. I don't see any other way to go about that. Remember, the guy has what, 6, 8 NHL games at this point? Remember the 100-game rule. This is what I till I was blue in the face with the whole Fleury, Murray stuff 7 years ago. I was absolutely blue in the face saying, cool your jets, calm your jets. Murray has a long way to go before he's, before that Play-Doh is formed. And, I mean, guess what? At 100 games, that's when, in 2018 is when he hit the 100 games. And and by then his flaws were there, and we kind of knew what they were, and so on and so forth. Don't anoint Blomqvist before it's time. Because NHL players are really good. I mean, the little things that go into each player's game is, you wouldn't believe. I mean, when I talk to Phil Bork, when I talk to Borky, he just starts dropping these little, the stick's in his right hand here. He needs to actually extend it or maybe transfer it to both hands and use the left here. It's watch his knee. Watch his knee. His knee should turn this way. And I talked to Francis Anzalone, Coach Francis Anzalone, who starts dropping this knowledge on me. And I realized just how ignorant we are as fans and as media, unless you've played and coached the game at the highest level. The amount of knowledge they don't give us is extreme. And from that standpoint, I always feel a little bit stupid trying to analyze some games when I know there's some, little details that we're missing. Although Francis is usually pretty good with me. He'll send me a text. And by the way, Francis has long been a source of mine. I'm very happy to bring him to you on the YouTube channel where you get to share in his knowledge that I've shared in for several years. He'll tell me, oh, you are spot on with this. Expand it further. Look at this, little detail or that little detail. Or if he thinks I'm in right field with a lacrosse stick, he'll tell me that too and say, okay, well, look at this and that and add that into your analysis and see if you come up with something different. He's been a wonderful resource for years. So when he does these coaches debriefs, definitely check them out on the YouTube channel. I do appreciate everyone subscribing. We're trying to figure out how to get this podcast on all of the platforms, the Spotify, the Apple, the Amazon. It is more difficult than you might think, not because those platforms reject me, but the technical enter this code here, cut and paste there, do the. My head was absolutely spinning. But we are going to have a little bit of a podcast network. Several guys on the Hockey Now network will be doing podcasts, and we're going to expand our offerings and have a little bit more fun with it. But I wanted to do a post-game, kind of a Tuesday, whatever the hell this was, So, my friends, I appreciate you very much. Do me a favor, share this around. Make sure you subscribe to the Shoutcast, and I'll figure out how to get it on Spotify and these other things. But listen this long, definitely. I really appreciate you. Look forward to your comments and your statements on the matter. I'm sure the Mike Sullivan stuff will dominate the comments. I hate the expression. Unfortunately, I can think of nothing else in the moment when I say about Mike Sullivan. It is what it is. All right. I'm Dan Kingerski. It is No Pucks Given here on the Hockey Now Network, and we need a better name for that, too. It's all coming up. Thanks.